Yeah, that's Gib right there for you.
Yeah, it's a struggle, man. Yeah, it's doing a CBS seal.
Hey, what's everybody? What's everybody doing? Hey, what's up, everybody? We're back. Welcome to the Introspect podcast, episode 3. Today we got a special surprise for you. I got my buddy Gibbo on here. Go ahead, Gibbo. You can introduce yourself.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, this is a cool experience. I've never really done this before, so sitting down with my buddy Engelbrecht is kind of cool, man. We're gonna see how this goes.
Yeah, obviously we're in the military, so we go by last names here, right? So I'm Engelbrecht. That's Gibson, right? I call him Gibbo. So you can see we got the bar stool action going, specifically because I only have one nice chair, so we're sitting in the bar stools today. So it's gonna be a little bit of a different deal here. But so last week we talked a little bit about one of the first phases of maturity I wanted to discuss with you guys. I was living, with the ashes, living in the ashes, eating all of them, doing all that good stuff. We also kind of capped off the Father's Day episode with the part 2, and we got into a little bit about the headspaces you want to create for your father, right? It was a good headspace, it was a bad headspace. The house metaphor, I really like that one. I just want to give a shout out to Robert Bly again with that Iron John book. He gave me that idea. And so it was funny because I always tell you guys, I'm saying, hey, let's start this conversation, right? And I'm hoping these videos, they spark conversations or thoughts within you guys that are provoking enough for you to go and you act on them, right? Make a difference in your own life, make a change in your own life. I'm just sharing my experiences with you guys. So that's one of the biggest reasons why I brought Gibson on here today, is because he actually reached out to me, and a few of you have, but he reached out to me so proactively that I decided that I was going to make him the first guest on the episode because of the insight that he gave me. So we had a brief conversation over text message. It took 10 minutes, and I was like, you know what, we got to have you on the podcast. And so
that's how we do it, man.
Yeah, so we ended up bringing him out here, and we were discussing a little bit over the text messages how creating that good and bad headspace isn't just for fathers. It's more along the lines of, like, you can do it with basically anybody, right? That's what you were kind of saying to me. You were saying that ultimately you can do it with your mother, you can do it with siblings, you can do it with anybody. And I put it last week, and we were kind of talking about a little bit how you can even do it with your dog, right?
Yeah,
you can
exactly.
basically do it with anybody.
Yeah.
And so I know I've experienced this. I know I've been talking about getting into mothers and other parents, other types of
relationships.
Yeah, exactly. So we talked about doing this. So Gibson actually has his own personal experience he wants to share with it, and so we're just going to kind of get into that a little bit this week and just see where it goes. So check it out.
Yeah, so basically, the experiences that I had with my family, I realized that, as you progress and as you move along in life and as you grow, you realize that once you get to the aft end of what you're dealing with as an adult, you kind of like look back and you say, okay, wow, how did that relationship with my parents really affect me, and what kind of place did it bring me into, right? So you're dealing with it, and you end up like thinking, wow, maybe I have an unhealthy relationship with my parents, or maybe my relationship with my parents isn't the best, and how did their relationship with me end up bringing me into it? And we kind of talked about it. There are roles that you play in life, whether it's
right.
I'm the husband, and I have a wife, and we have conversations, and it's a different kind of relationship than you have with your son or with your dog or your friends or whatever, right?
That's right.
So as you deal with it, and as you end up going through with it, in my personal experience, and what I would like to kind of showcase and apply is that in the short term case, just recently, me and my wife were discussing it, and I'd have long phone conversations with my mom. I'd have these long drawn out emotional talk. It's like that stupid stuff. Where you're looking at your mom, you're like, oh baby, I miss you, blah blah blah. And you're frustrated with it, because you're like, I gotta listen to this again, and you end up realizing it's deeper than that. My wife started to have commentary and started saying, hey, as you talk to your mom, and as I listen to you talk to your mom, I start to realize that you kind of like take on her baggage. Mm-hmm. Specifically, I'll take on her baggage, and she'll talk to me about I'm just so upset with my husband. She's going through a divorce, or I'm just so upset at work and stuff like that. And then I started to think about it. I was like, wow, that relationship with my mom ends up translating into a codependency, emotional-based relationship where she expects me to step up for her and be there for her. And as I look into it, what do you kind of think about, being a child, having to deal with those kinds of relationships with your mom specifically, and then having to take on that role for her?
Yeah, so I actually find that one kind of interesting because I found myself in the same situation a lot of times growing up where I was, and I didn't realize this as a kid, and as you said earlier, we don't really realize this as children, but so just for example, when my mom had me when she was 16.
Sure.
Right? So my mom was a kid having a kid, right? And I've expressed that before, but so ultimately my mom was, when she was going through something, I ultimately was going through it with her, just because, I mean, she had her parents, but much like a lot like all of us when we were younger, depending on your situation, we don't really feel like our parents are the ones that we can talk to, right?
Yeah.
They say, oh, hey, you can talk to me, you can tell me anything, I'm your mom, I'm your dad, you're supposed to tell me anything. Ultimately, though, we don't really want to, right? We want to have somebody else, another outlet that we can express our feelings, right? Because we don't always want to do that with our parents.
Yeah, you reach out to your friends or your girlfriend or whoever's important in that moment in your life. You want to reach out to them before you reach out to your parents, of course.
Exactly. And so my mom going through that for herself at 16, but already having a kid, was like, oh, I don't have to go to my own parents. I've got a kid here that
I can utilize this resource.
yeah, I've created this, and he has no option. He's got to listen to me,
Yeah.
So it was at a young age, but before 10 years old, I obviously had no idea what that was happening, right? I just was accepting it. It is what it was, and it played big factors in my life as I grew up, obviously. But ultimately, I realized on my later teen years, around 17, 18, really into like 20, right, 19 and 20, I started to realize that was just I was her number one outlet, right?
Yes,
I was her go-to. I need to get some stuff off my chest. And whether she was telling me what she was really going through, or whether she was, being detailed with it or not, she was just getting her emotions and expressing them out, to me in a conversation, because I was all that she really had.
Yeah.
Right?
What happens with that is that your parents end up thinking, especially in her situation where she was a young mom,
right.
like having to deal with those situations. Not only like having to learn who she really is, because we don't develop until we're in our early 20s.
Right.
Yeah. You have to take it back and say, okay, wow, like your mom will open up that floodgate, or your dad, or whoever's your parental figure will open up that floodgate, and now you have to assume that responsibility because they've opened up a different kind of relationship with you.
Right.
And setting those boundaries is the parent's job. It's the parent's role. We talked earlier about how you have a child's role and you have a parent's role, and there's different kinds of things. You're not supposed to tell your mom that you went out and got drunk last night with your buddies and you're like 16. And your parents aren't supposed to tell you like what kind of problems they're having with their spouse or with their husband,
right.
or whatever's going on. They're not
Right.
supposed to open that to you because it's not your job to take on that emotional burden that you carry.
Right.
So it's very frustrating. I agree.
Yeah, and it's very situational too. Not everybody necessarily goes through that, but ultimately a lot of kids do. And so it got to a certain point where even as I got older, and even now to the point I just turned 23 and I'm sitting here, and my mom, I'm still her kind of go-to. At least that's what it feels like. I may not know specifically coming from her standpoint, but I still feel like I'm her go-to. So if she's going through something, she's gonna call me. Or my mom does it in a really funny way. She'll just text me randomly. We may have just talked the previous day, but she'll text me like, hey baby, I love you, I miss you so much, like you're such a great son, you know what I mean, you make me so proud. And I'm like, okay, like I appreciate that, but what's going on? I know something's going on, because you're not just gonna randomly text me, you know what I mean, something's going on. So then I always have to, we reach out and we'll have a little conversation, and we don't always necessarily get into what she's going through, but I can tell that just speaking to me and that alone is helping her get through whatever it is that she's going through. Whether
Sure.
it can be as small as a bad day, or it can be as big as like a fight between her and my dad. You know what I mean? We've gotten to the point in my life where I have just become that person that she goes to and she talks to.
Correct. Yeah.
And I think now that I'm old enough to handle it, I think it can be a healthy situation. But I think growing up
Definitely
in that role isn't as healthy, you know what I mean? Because we get to a certain point, you guys get to a certain point where, you start to develop your own perspective on life, and you're having to deal with your own issues, right? But then now you're having to deal, you know, with or you have been, or, you know, whatever the case may be, you're also dealing with your parents' issues as well, you know?
Correct, yeah.
Because they may not be at the point in their own maturity to where they can keep their issues between, you know, mom and dad, or, you know, just one or the other, separate from the things that you're going through. They don't know how to do that. So that if they're going through a problem, being the head of the household, it reflects that. They reflect it onto their children and throughout the household itself, you know, and so everybody's going through this problem with mom and dad.
Correct, yeah, and I like to kind of paint it like a yard. You know, like as a kid, you know, you're given a small amount of space. You know, whether it's a crib or whatever. You know, you're given this boundary line of what you're allowed to do, what you're allowed to think, and how you're supposed to act. And every healthy relationship with your child should be like that. You should be able to say, hey, I don't want my kid to grow up like this, so I'm going to implement these things based off of my experiences. I'm going to go ahead and showcase my children these kinds of things and try and separate them from this outside influence. And we're going to try and navigate them through that slowly and in my way that makes me feel comfortable. But the problem is that when your parents end up going through these problems and they have unhealthy relationships based off of the parents that they had with their parents, right? You know, they end up drawing like a kind of a wavy line. You don't really have a really strict border. So then you start to cross it, you know, and that's where you get kids, you know, where they feel like, oh, you know, I can talk to my mom like this because we have that cool relationship. Or you have that friend that, you know, can, you know, go hang out with the stepdad, you know, do cool stuff, and he gives you a beer when you're out playing football or whatever, you know, and it's not big of a deal.
Yep.
That means a lot. You know, that means truly a lot for who you are as a person and what that can translate into how you have relationships with the people in your life. And, you know, to dive back into my mom's point, right? So, you know, I have a problem with my mom. After realizing that I had a codependent emotional relationship with my mom, it gets frustrating, you know, because she calls me up, and whether it's something small, like you said, or something big, you know, it could be something as small as, you know, I had a bad day at work, blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, it's okay. That's okay. It's healthy. It's healthy to be able to say, hey, I want to talk to my mom. I want to make her feel better, right? But when it comes down to things that are my mom's responsibility to handle on her own, it's not my responsibility to step up and kind of say, okay, mom, I think I should give you this advice because, No, you're not supposed to give your parents that advice. You're not supposed to give your parents advice at all.
Right.
You're supposed to get advice. You're supposed to feel comfortable. They're supposed to give you things in life to give you the keys to open up those doors so that you feel comfortable in those different kinds of situations that you don't know how to navigate yet. And given their lifespan and their life experience, they should be able to give you that.
Right.
You know. And then,
I agree with that.
Yeah, you just get through this time loop where you feel like, fuck, man, like I can't deal with these kinds of things on my own. I can't even ask my mom to do it because I have to give her advice. So now I don't even feel comfortable going to the one person I should feel safe with in an environment where she should be able to give me constructive criticism. I don't even respect it. Sometimes you don't even respect the constructive criticism you can get from your parents.
Well, I can understand that because, you know, you basically get to, and not everybody goes through this, right? But a lot of us do, you know what I mean? And Gibson and I have found a lot within the military, you know, being that as we're in the military, that you experience a lot of the same type of I guess parent to child relationships, and that's how a lot of us connect, you know, whether we discuss it, you know, personally with each other or not. It basically just draws us together because we can almost sense that we've kind of gone through the same thing, so it just makes it that much easier to kind of connect with each other, right? But I can also agree with that because there's both sides. So like if you're a narcissist like this guy right here, this one, right, then you almost kind of enjoy being able to give advice to your parents when they need it, right?
Yes.
But it definitely to a certain extent it can get very frustrating because you don't always want to feel like you should. You frankly, like you said, you shouldn't have to do that, right? And this is something I talked about my dad, right, where it got to a point where I started to not respect my dad as much because it was like, I'm supposed to be learning from you, but you're not providing the way that a man should provide. Right?
And then you think you know better.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, 15, 16-year-old me thought I freaking knew everything. You know what I mean? So it was like nobody knows more than me. You know what I mean? It was just like I knew how to utilize Google more than anybody else in my life. So that everything I got off of Google was the truth, and that's it. And if you didn't Google it as much as me, then I know more than you. So, it just got to a point where I started to not respect my dad as much, and then it actually got to a point where I didn't respect my mom as much either. You know what I mean? Because I felt like the lessons that I was going through, if I was going through like lessons at 20 years old, and she was going through those same lessons at 35. I was like, there's a problem.
You start to reach those milestones, and you recognize that in your parents. Like, well, my mom hasn't even realized how to bite her tongue in situations. Right, you know, you're going to give advice to everybody, whether it's your friends or whatever. Yeah.
Well, and then there's even like, and I don't want to go too far off on a tangent here, but this is good because like there's even to a point where it's like some people will realize that they should bite their tongues, but they choose not to. Yes. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's actually a really good term. I just was having a conversation with my buddy Hassanlop about this. Cognitive dissonance. Okay. Right? So the best way I can describe it to you guys who don't know what cognitive dissonance is let's say I'm smoking a cigarette, or I'm hitting my vape, right? Ultimately, I know it's not good for me, right? I know that vaping, you know, it's not as bad as cigarettes, but I know that it's not good for me. I know I'd be better off not vaping, but because I enjoy it and because it gives me a good feeling, I choose to do it anyways. Or the same thing of me, you know, with me drinking a beer. I know it's not going to do any good for me, but ultimately I enjoy it, so I choose to do it, right?
Sure, you find a way to justify your bad actions.
Right, yeah. And so it's kind of the same thing, you know, as for example, like my mom, she, you know, there was a point in time in her life where she specifically chose not to bite her tongue. She always had something to say, you know what I mean?
We know those kinds of people, yeah.
Yeah, you know, and so she would always pop, or my aunt was worse at it. She would pop off on anybody at any given time. Oh man,
cookout or nothing.
Yeah, my aunt does not play. My mom doesn't either, but my aunt is a little more dramatic with it, if I'm just being honest. But it's kind of funny because my mom, she got to a point where she started to realize that was happening, and so she eventually stopped. But I was going through such a developmental age, or I guess a time period, that I thought that's okay, well, that's what I should do then. So I also got to a point where I wasn't necessarily like filtering myself, you know what I mean? That was kind of when I was going through my I don't really care about anything because I know everything phase.
Yeah, and to touch on that point, right? Like you end up dealing with relationships, and that's human nature. You learn from other people. You learn from what not to do. Most of the time, It's the easiest way to learn. You know, like if you have a dad that goes to jail, you know, you deal with that kind of experience. You go, okay, those are things I shouldn't do in life because that's the end result for me. And a lot of people don't see that. You have these conversations. This conversation doesn't mean a lot per se in that moment, but it speaks a lot to your character and who you are and truly how you act with other people in your interpersonal relationships. So you end up spending that time having those small conversations, and it builds up and it builds up. Then you end up having this one way of thinking. And it takes a long time to get out of that one way of thinking by realizing that, wow, that other person acts like this. And a lot of times you might have relationships and be like, man, I hate that guy. Like he's just so annoying, so frustrating. Yeah. And then you have someone looking at you that you did the same exact thing, man. Like you did the same exact thing. And it's hard for you to realize your own faults when you're in one-track mind. So always try and stay open-minded and think about, okay, how am I supposed to relate how I act to other people, and put yourself in other shoes. And that's a basic lesson you learn as a kid, you know, like don't do unto others as you would do on blah, blah, blah. You know, don't do unto your neighbor, blah, blah, blah. So you end up looking at it like, okay, if I can't treat other people the way I want to be treated, essentially that's the baseline rule. You just want to make sure that you're doing the right thing in every moment.